public-private partnerships moving forward, because this is very creatively leveraging precious county resources in a way that really makes sense. So I encourage us to look at these models. I always do that. Robin knows well. But thank you again.
Well, congratulations on being able to see something from the earliest stages all the way through what will hopefully be your first splash into the water. Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, I just want to echo the model piece, and I want to thank you for your leadership. Thank the former rec director, the current rec director, DGS. We had a great meeting to discuss this particular project, and I couldn't help, as we looked at the project, think about the opportunities for the public-private partnerships to, as my colleague said, make a dollar out of 75 cents, but also to have world-class recreational opportunities that are in our urban environments that we're really pushing, that are transit accessible, which is a critical component so that they can meet the needs of entire communities. And I could think of certain places with significant needs in Montgomery County where hopefully we can take a very similar model and seize opportunities as redevelopment occurs to find ways that we can increase the value of the private developments by providing great public amenities and doing it at a cost to the taxpayer that is significantly reduced because of benefits to access to existing public parking and access to land and perhaps density that we wouldn't otherwise have. So,
in other words, we want one in Bethesda too?
Here.
Okay, thank you. All right, David, Robin, take us away.
David Dice, Director, Department of General Services. Well, I'm going to congratulate Vivian Yao for an excellent packet. I think she has described the issues quite well. It is correct that through a lot of extra efforts and requiring a public bid, requiring negotiations and with the contractor, that we lowered the cost of this project by what it could be as a standalone facility by over $20 million. But hearing Vivian, hearing Councilmember Albornoz, you have a packet in front of you that shows you some illustrations and images, most of which you're already familiar with. And I learned a long time ago that when everyone's agreeing with you, you should stop talking. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're happy to provide for you any details or answer any questions that you may have.
All right. I have definitely had the chance to sit down with you last week and go over all of this in detail, so I'm fairly familiar with it. And I'll just, again, reiterate the council staff's comment that this was anticipated to cost more than we had in the budget. We knew that. We didn't know what the right number was. You've gone through a process now, and you feel that you know what the right number is.
Correct.
And so that will reflect that. So I just had a couple of very quick questions. Mm-hmm. So the project, remind me, this is an HOC. What is the role of the Lee development property? It's behind the HOC property, and it's like phase 3?
It is adjacent. The assemblage of the properties create the total project footprint. There'll be 3 buildings, of which the rec center comprises under a foundational element under one building. Part of it, the pool and the gymnasium area, will be an independent part of, and access through the community plaza. And we'll have a beautiful wall, a lit pool and gymnasium wall along the neighboring street, which is Fenwick Lane. So it's a combination of those. There's an underground parking structure that services the HOC residential towers. The county's facility is zero parked because, as Mr. Albornoz pointed out, we're relying upon the existing parking in the facility's county parking structure right across 2nd Street. So so
the private owner is just going to build are we building on their property to some extent?
Part of it is on there.
Just part of it.
But the county's agreement is with HOC.
Right.
HOC has an agreement for building on the land owned by Lee Development. So there's an agreement between Lee and HOC for the use of the property. The county's condominium interests, which is the park or the Aquatic Center and Rec Center is with HOC.
So this building, the existing Elizabeth House is coming down. It's just going to be
Yes,
demolished.
that is correct.
And then this whole complex gets built. And has it already been vacated, the Elizabeth House, or it's still?
I don't. Okay, yeah, Elizabeth House has moved into their new building adjacent. So right now, the building is empty. We are, with the approval of this supplemental, we now have a set amount to put into the development agreement that we've negotiated with HOC. We're supposed to get final comments from HOC on that agreement this Friday so that we can take that to the record, and then they will begin their construction activity. But we've held off on a GDA until we had a firm number that we could everyone could rely on. Our commitment to them and their commitment to us is that that number will not change. We have been very firm in our negotiations with HOC that any subsequent changes to the project that are not specifically requested by the county do not impact that cost. So the county's cost that we're talking about now will be the cost and will not change.
All right. Andrew?
Thank you for that. I just speaking of the costs, and we've hinted around it, but I think it's important in a public forum. Could you just, and we talked about this in our private meeting, but what the cost of the project is in total today, and what you believe, based on your understanding of what it would have cost had we not had a public-private partnership like the one we have if we were building this as a standalone county project?
Sure,
I think
happy
that's
to do
important.
so. The concern, if there's any concern about the supplemental and the amount of the supplemental being requested, as Ms. Yao pointed out in her briefing, the original placeholder price was based upon a rounded square foot or price per square foot back when the project was originally envisioned. At that time, we said, council was aware that that was only a gross estimate, and until there was a definitive POR and price was validated by the market, we couldn't guarantee what that final cost would be. The project was originally being priced through an open book process. We insisted with our friends at HOC that it be competitively bid. There were bidders on this. We took the most qualified, lowest bid, which was, the nearest bid was $9 million higher. So that and negotiations with the contractor and with HOC Value Engineering to right size and to deal with any issues that came up were exhaustively taken. That's one of the reasons for the delay in the schedule, is because those negotiations, both with HOC and the contractor, were pretty extensive. So we're very confident in the number that we have. Again, to your question, Councilmember Friedson, were we to do this same project on a piece of ground in Silver Spring, I think Mr. Albornoz was pretty clear that in the first place, that piece of ground does not exist in Silver Spring. Particularly to then essentially zero park this facility because we're relying upon existing parking. That combined price of land, price of constructing parking is at least $20 million more than this would otherwise cost. So the fact that this opportunity came about, we have a willing partner, we have a very qualified contractor, the county taxpayers are saving quite a bit of money as far as what the price of this project would be on a separate piece of ground.
Appreciate that, and look forward to continuing the conversation for Bethesda and other urban areas to
we
make
will
sure
talk.
we meet the huge needs that are in the rest of the county. But I'm excited about this project and about this as a model moving forward for the future, particularly in the county's growing urban areas. So thank you.
All right. I think without objection, we are moving forward. Thank you. Our next item is an amendments to the Capital Improvements Program of MNCPPC. I will invite Mike Riley, Carl Morgan, John Kroll, and anyone else who should be up in front. All right, good. So this is entirely the Parks Department's CIP, or is there anything that in this conversation that is not Parks?
This is all about parks.
It's entirely Parks. Great. Well, we'll hear from Andrew Friedson as we proceed a little bit. Andrew's our Parks lead, and I know he's been out meeting with communities across his district and hearing from residents about our parks and paying close attention to how we are planning for the future of parks. And there's so much happening in Bethesda. I am going to want to talk about the Bethesda parking lot to parks conversion vision and where we are in that today. It's not really before us directly in this packet, but I think it'd be a good chance to just talk a little bit about that. So now I will turn to Pam.
Good morning. Yeah, before you have some discussion of the CIP changes that were brought by MNC PPC, and then the county executives recommended changes to their CIP. And in the first, there are 4 sort of changes or amendments that are being recommended. The first 2 really involve funds that are representative of contributions. They are funded through contributions instead of GAO bonds. The first is the small grant donor-assisted capital improvements project. The second is the Bethesda Park impact payment. The small grant donor-assisted project is actually being modified to an increase for greater than expected revenue in the next year. So
The small grant donor assisted, okay.
so that's going up by $800,000. The second is the Bethesda Park impact payment CIP item. This is brand new. It really is where those PIP payments from the Bethesda plan come into play. It's a place where they go from the developers as they make those contributions. And what the county executive has recommended is that in the current CIP, there had been estimates for what might come in FY21 and 22, and that those be taken out at this time, and that we reevaluate at the next full CIP what they might be. And so it doesn't change the expectation for FY20. Those are based on site plans, so that's more of a known revenue stream. And we wait-
FY20 is based on site plans?
Yes.
So it's, I want to talk about this a little bit. So it's
Okay, sure,
10
go ahead.
million in FY20, that's the expectation?
I think it's 9, it's just a little bit under 10 that I think is committed plans.
That's great. So that's a lot of revenue for parks. It's really impressive. It was a very interesting feature of the Bethesda sector plan, which Chairman Anderson really, this was his stamp here, saying, hey, we're going to create a density pool, and development that wants to go forward is going to have to pay a little extra into a fund so that we can build the park facilities that we need in downtown Bethesda. And it's not very often an idea goes to a $10 million budget item just like that, and here we are. So thank you for that. How much of that is already kind of spoken for as far as your capital program, Mike?
Well, we have a very long list of potential acquisitions based on the master plan, and then we, of course, have a lot of development projects also proposed in Bethesda. The list far exceeds the revenue, of course, that's known to be coming in to date. But I
And
would,
did you,
I would
in
call this
FY
a good start.
in FY20, did you estimate 16 million, or did you were in agreement with the executive branch on the FY20 number?
We had looked
Yeah.
at both plans that had been approved and what was in the pipeline to come up with that 16. We don't object to the executive recommendation here to only go with what is really approved, because we can come back to you at any given time. And my experience has been, if the money is received and it's not tax-supported money, the council has no issue immediately appropriating it for if there's a need.
Okay, Andrew?
Thanks. So I have a couple questions about this. One is, it seems we're taking a bit of a different approach to this set of volatile revenue source than we do for others. Like, we just had a pretty robust discussion about, at the full council and prior to that in the GEO committee, about transportation impact tax and school impact tax, and we took a certain approach to that where we made certain assumptions and we based planning off of those assumptions. Here we're taking a different approach, and I'm not saying that I necessarily am concerned about the different approach, but what I am concerned about is whether or not we run the risk of delaying or denying opportunities in Bethesda because we're not assuming the money being in there. Not to say that we're going to spend the PIP money in other parts of the county, but that we're going to forgo opportunities potentially in Bethesda, arguably the place in the county that has the most need for additional public open green space, because we are waiting to see what happens with these PIP funds. When the PIP funds, which I strongly support and commend Chairman Anderson for his efforts here and all those who were part of the Bethesda plan and this important aspect of the Bethesda plan. But we run the risk of taking away from what the original intent was this was supposed to be on top of normally scheduled acquisitions and beautifications and et cetera.
Well, I think that when we see an acquisition opportunity, we have some flexibility in funding sources. For example, when we acquired the Capitol Crescent Civic Green, we went to ALARF, and we could even use ALARF again and pay it back with the PIP fund if we needed to. When the planning board gets an acquisition opportunity brought to us, we want to know.
Can you move this a little closer?
I'm sorry. We want to know what's the funding source, how are we going to pay for this, and obviously we can't go to the property owner and make an offer unless we have a source of revenue identified. Typically, we're not required to close the next day, so we'll negotiate with the property owner and say, we have an agreement on the purchase price, what the terms are. We can work it out. If we need to come back to the council to get approval to use additional money from the PIP, we usually can do that without much of a problem. And we wouldn't be making an acquisition with the idea of using the PIP unless we had the money in hand. So I think that we're probably okay with this. I do think it is a little bit conservative what the executives proposed, but I don't think it really pinches our ability to move forward with transactions as the PIP funds come in. So we don't really have a serious problem with it.
So there won't be any delay on any potential project in Bethesda as a result.
We don't see that as being a problem.
We don't foresee that.
And if I could add, Jenny with OMB, I just wanted to clarify that the executive did concur with the amount that was proposed by Park and Planning for the approved site plans in FY20. So it's not a shortfall of anything that was expected for the coming fiscal year. The FY20 amount or FY21 amount we'd like to revisit during the next full CIP, so you'll see that come through next year. We're hoping at that point a lot of the pipeline projects have gone through site plan approval, and so the costs associated with it and PIPs associated with those are more known at that time and then able to be included in the PDF. What we didn't want to do is overestimate before we had approved site plans and set some expectations for the Bethesda community that we would then feel obligated to backfill, perhaps using other county resources that are constrained in the future. So we wanted to sort of see how all these projects move through their approval process before including them.
And I appreciate it. I think my only concern really, one was the delay or denying of Bethesda, and which I'm glad that is not going to be the case, and I will make sure that you are held to that standard, and we hold ourselves to that standard. The only other concern is the perception in the community that this was a key piece of the Bethesda sector plan, and there are a lot of mixed rhetoric going around about some of the understandable challenges with construction and some of the other issues related to that, and to make sure that it's clear that some of the benefits of what these new developments are bringing, part of which is funding the PIP, which is going to go to the open public green space that is so desired and needed in downtown Bethesda. I just want to make sure that we're not cutting off our nose to spite our face in terms of the public perception of what is happening in terms of that redevelopment and the current issues related to construction and other challenges that residents, small businesses, and others who frequent Bethesda are facing today.
Okay. I would like to see a very specific list of projects that would be funded with the $10 million. I'm a little unclear here. It seems like we're appropriating $10 million and Parks doesn't have a you may have it internally, but we're not seeing that here. Am I correct in?
We do, and the list is divided between acquisition and development. Some of the development projects we know of are on a timeline that we can predict fairly accurately. Some of the acquisition projects sometimes depend on the availability of the
Right.
the
No, I'm sure
property.
you have an arrangement, but I don't see it here. Am I missing
No.
that? So could we follow up on that, please? I'd like to
And
go over that.
To both of your comments, I think it's maybe helpful to remind your constituents that the Bethesda plan lays out park priorities very specifically. And the fact that we were able to acquire the Capitol Crescent Civic Green, and I know you'd said, Mr. Reamer, that you wanted to return to the topic of the Farm Women's Market, that would be 2 out of the top 3 park priorities in the
Yeah.
plan, accomplished really with a very early
Right.
life of the plan. So I think that
Very rare that you see major public benefits getting built at the front end of master plans. They typically are aspirational, and they take sometimes decades to materialize, and sometimes they never materialize.
Right, and that's partly because the PIP's available. It's partly because we're aware that the Bethesda Farm Women's Market owners were ready to sell and eager to move on. So I think we can show that we are delivering, to Mr. Friesen's point, even as some of the disruptive things about redevelopment occur in Bethesda.
So, to the point on the Bethesda Farm Women's Market, I really just want to ask everyone to work towards this goal. The master plan really called out a very specific vision of building a world-class destination park facility there in that location. There is a proposal to have some development on the property. I think some development is fine in order to provide funding. There's a lot of pushback on that development, and the consequence of having less development is more dollars required from the public sector, and there is a balance there. It has to be affordable. We have to be able to make all of this happen. The worst case scenario is we're sitting here 4 years from now with a parking lot that hasn't changed, and there's no park in progress. So I know the executive branch is working hard on this, and the development company's working hard on this, parks working hard on this. We're very close. I think we're very close here to getting an agreement to move forward, and it appears to me, while there are multiple priorities, the Civic Plaza on Woodmont is, the first, and this Farm Women's Market Park is second, and East Bethesda. There's a vision of East Bethesda, that space there. We need to figure out how they all fit together with the funding that we have available. So that's part of why I wanted to just go into the details of this 10 million and understand a little bit better what's already committed and what might be available to those different projects.
Yeah, we'd be happy to go over some of those specifics and not just what's priority, but what's likely to be available in the near term.
It was a huge community priority, as you know, to build that big park at the Bethesda Farm Women's Market. That was something that, everyone involved in the plan sort of felt like that is an essential part of this vision, and it is true when you add 10,000 people to Bethesda, as are going to be added as a result of this sector plan. They need they need recreation, and they need space, and they need places to breathe and to be. And so that park has, I think, tremendous potential and positive impact. But we just need to follow through on that.
That park is definitely a huge priority from just the park's perspective. As you know, we've had this world-class rural and suburban park system for decades in Montgomery
Right.
County. We've had urban parks. We've called parks urban in Montgomery County, but they're not the parks you find in the major cities in the core of the downtowns. This is an opportunity for a park that's surrounded by retail, that has hundreds of eyes on it at all times to keep it safe, and it's unique. We don't have that yet. So this really is a signature opportunity here for the type of urban park that's active and vibrant that we don't have in Montgomery County because of the mix of things around it, the Farm Women's Market, the retail, and the residential development surrounding it, looking at it.
Terrific. Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to echo what both of you have said, because I think this is an absolutely critical project, and I think that it will help redefine Bethesda, and this is central to the vision of creating transit-oriented development and urban nodes, but to have the large public open space that are activated, and that there are placemaking efforts that are there that meet pedestrians and bicyclists and retail users and workers and residents all in one great area. I think it's absolutely critical. I do also think that it's important. Some of the conversation on this I think has been somewhat misconstrued, and I think the chair brought this up, but it's a question of not how good a deal a developer or developers are getting. It's a question of how much are we able to put in to make this park a reality and taxpayer money. How much can we afford to make this happen? The value of the land is the value of the land. If we give up a small piece of that land in order to make the project work, or FAR in order to make that work, it's worth what it's worth, and we need to get the fair market value for what it's worth, and we need to make sure that we're moving forward and making progress so that the pains associated short term with some of the construction and development are offset by the progress towards the vision of the downtown plan. And so I appreciate you working so hard to make that happen. I hope that the county executive will continue to push on his end to make this happen, and look forward to continuing those conversations to make this occur as quickly as possible, which I agree is a unique situation in terms of a plan being realized, a key aspect of a plan, a public amenity being realized so early in the process.
So while the county executive voted against this master plan, we'll give him a break if he can help deliver this park. All right. What is this about the request for $500,000 for ball field renovations in Cup?
Right. The next two items, the next two amendments, one was for a request for $500,000 for the from the community use of public funds, CUF funds, for ball field renovation, and it's not being denied. The executive isn't saying that this isn't useful money. It's just saying that the conversation should occur during the operating budget, and so to defer that conversation. But I mean, you're welcome to ask the park staff what's involved with the funds, but I think
Okay.
I don't think anyone's worried about deferring the
All right.
conversation.
Well, we'll defer the conversation, but I think this is important. I want to see your ball field program continue to grow and to expand. You're doing a phenomenal job with that program. Unfortunately, I think people don't know about it. They continue to say, wouldn't it be great if the Parks Department were managing fields at contemporary standards of natural turf management? And like, you are. It's growing, it's building, we're making a lot of progress. So, Mike, any comment you want to make?
Yeah, just there's a long history to Parks' role in improving the MCPS fields. It goes way back to 2000. We have renovated and maintained the majority of the middle schools in the county, but only about half the elementary schools. And over the last several years, we've received about exactly $1 million from the CUP fund balance to resume renovating mainly elementary schools and then taking them into our maintenance fold. So this is the fund source, or has been the fund source, to continue that program. I have no objection, of course, to deferring the discussion a month or two to the operating budget, but I just implore the committee to make this a priority as other competing priorities for the fund balance.
I mean, I don't understand the specific process issue here. I mean, I would say let's go ahead with this request. What is it that we're deferring? I would prefer to agree with the Parks Department here that this money should be coming.
I'm happy to answer that. The operating budget will have the most up-to-date information of what is available in the CUP balance to actually spend. And so when this was proposed, it was last fall, and there's been changes since then. So what you'll see in the operating budget proposal is the most known information at that time, as well as the executive's priorities for how to spend those dollars.
But
Yeah, I want to concur. I think what we've done is we've waited. We've delayed this decision just because we really don't know what the balance is in the fund. It could be more. It could be that you'll be able to say, move more quickly on this, but it's a little bit hard to pick a dollar amount before they've done their analysis on what the CUF balance is.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I think the concern that I have, which I think might be similar to Chairman Reamer, is, are we deprioritizing it by waiting? Are we sitting around and waiting to see that it's available, as opposed to reflecting the priority of the council for this to happen? I mean, our budget process isn't just about how much particular funds in a particular line item are available. It's the council demonstrating what its priorities are on behalf of the public. And then when we have to make decisions to make adjustments, those adjustments are made in mind of the priorities that are set through the budget process. And so part of my concern, while I appreciate the fiscal conservatism and I share some of that prudence, I'm concerned that by us sitting out so many of these aspects that are priorities of the council in the interest of getting the most up-to-date information, we may be ceding the obligation that we have as public representatives to express what our priorities are, so that when we do get to the point where we have to make tough decisions in the budget process, we haven't properly put forward what our priorities are in a transparent, accountable, and open way.
I think you may have just done that. My sense is that it's the committee's will to convey to the county executive that you want to place a priority on expenditures for ball fields in the CUP fund balance, and to ask him to consider that as
Yeah, I mean,
he's
to
pulling
continue
those
this-
numbers together.
Absolutely. Like, if we were to concur with Parks on this, could they proceed now? Or is this, what year is this funding?
No, it still would not be, this is for next year's funding.
Okay, so it's for next year's funding
And
under any
so
circumstance.
we're, regardless of whether you decide
Right.
today or April, this gets approved in May with the rest of the budget, and they could not access the money until July 1st anyway. And, we will make sure that the executive is aware of the priority, which is consistent with what the council has said in the past, too. So this
Right.
is nothing new, and with the intent that if by some chance his budget is submitted showing different numbers, it will be the committee's intent to change those.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I've said before, I'll say again, I think you do a terrific job of maintaining these ball fields, and I actually think that we ought to be moving towards all of the county's ball fields being under your supervision, and I would like to move, long-term towards that goal in mind. If there's a way, Mr. Chairman, to put in a formal way, not just saying it here in the public record, but in a formal way, have our committee report reflect the priority of ball fields in the next budget moving forward. I think it's clear that both of us feel really strongly about this, if you'd be okay with that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. This has been a recurring theme. What we will need to do as a committee is go to bat at CUP to get as much funding as possible for ball fields.
Right.
So that CUP conversation happens as it's like a ed. Where does that happen in the budget process?
The ball field funding will come back to you
Okay.
when we discuss the Parks Department operating budget. And I'll just add one little other nuance here. I think it's always been the Parks Department's and the council's goal to get to a point where all schools are maintained by parks. But there is a little bit of complication in that every time you renovate a school, you take it out of service for a little while. So even if we had unlimited dollars, we would never say do them all next year. So they try and pace it in a way that the school system can move children to other fields as those fields are being renovated. And so every year there's a discussion with the department about what is the appropriate pace. And the council tries to move that as quickly as possible.
For anyone who's watching, this is an important point. Parks can't properly maintain a field that wasn't properly built. And that is something that is not appreciated. And if you want a field to look nice and to survive weather impacts and the impact of children running on it, it has to be constructed to last. And a lot of people just think if Parks could just come in and take over this field, then it would be a beautiful green field all the time. And that's not the reality. And Parks is really stuck to its guns and said, we'll take over the fields after we've modernized them or renovated them, but we can't take on, a brown ruined field and then turn it into a nice field without some renovation expenses. And so there's only so many fields that they can renovate every year, and that's a challenge. And also, there are some schools that have fields that are too small for natural grass. There's the play spaces, like they're spaces that when I was a kid were asphalt, and I got the skin knees to prove it. But today we try not to add more asphalt to the playground surface, but we're also, as a result, we need to use alternative playing surfaces frequently. We need to use rubber, or we need to use turf. We need to use other types of surfaces, because grass, there's just a limit to how well it will do in a very concentrated play area, where again, historically you would have had asphalt. That's what kids in the 70s did, and we loved it, But your program there, it's been controversial, because a lot of parents just say, well, why can't parks just come in and take over everything? There's a division of labor here. We're adding funding to the budget every year for renovation. This CUP request comes as part of that strategy. We want parks to modernize those fields.
Oh, that's it. This is the revenue source.
This is it,
For the
right?
school field
So
conversion.
for all the folks who haven't weighed in today, but are constantly haranguing us on social media about this issue, this is the issue that you should be haranguing us about, adding more funds to CUP so that fields can be modernized, okay? Very good. I've said my piece. As you can tell, I feel strongly about this one. But, it's a big area. The history here, 5 years ago, a parent at East Silver Spring came to me and said, why is this field, why am I at the PTA charged with maintaining this field? We can't do it. It's not working. And we started looking into this, and we realized we needed to make some big changes system-wide. And so we've been working very closely over the last few years, added a lot of funding into this budget item. And, we're on a good track, but it's going to take time, and we're working our way forward.
May I comment?
Please.
When this program started back in 2000, the big focus back then was improving school sites that would provide game and league experience for sports teams and leagues like MSI, BCC Baseball, in the weekends and evenings, and also improving the experience for the school children during PE
Right.
and after-school activities.
Exactly.
So as we selected sites, they tended to be the ones that provided game experience, which were the bigger sites.
Right.
The issue you just pointed out is gaining priority. It's the equity issue.
Right.
It's the kids that can't even go outdoors at their elementary school because it's mud and dust
Right.
and rocks. And
Absolutely.
we have a lot of those.
We do.
And
My kids go to
I couldn't
those.
agree to you more. There's going to be a subset of the remaining elementary schools where we can come in and create a better natural grass experience.
Right.
But then there's going to be some of the smallest, most challenging ones
Right.
where you're going to have to look at other alternatives if you want those school children
That's
to
right.
have a decent outdoor experience as part of their educational program.
Right. Thank you, Mike. I mean, Tacoma Park and Piney Branch Elementary, my two kids go there. Tacoma Park, we tried it with a field several times under the old program. It never worked. It was just mud and dirt. Now we've got a fantastic play space. Yes, is a poured-in-place rubber surface on part of that space. There's also grass. There's also trees. There's everything there. No one's talking about going next door to Piney Branch and removing the grass field at the park and putting in AstroTurf. No one's talking about doing that. Like, that's not, we're not crazy here. We maintain grass where it is appropriate. And that Wilhelm field is a grass field, and it's going to always be a grass field. So there's some rational decision-making involved in how we are approaching this program. Okay, as you can see, it's hard to stay on time when everything is so interesting. So
That's
here we
why
go.
it's fun being the parks lead.
Yeah.
It's a good topic.
There you go.
So the next one should be quick. It is simply that there's a slight adjustment to the cricket fields because they are ahead of schedule. Doesn't change the budget at all. Maybe
All right.
move forward on that one.
Please,
quickly.
let's move forward on that one.
Okay. But the bigger issue for today, out of all of our discussion so far, is really the affordability reconciliation PDF that's been requested by the executive. And the executive has sent over requests that the park CIP be reduced by $1.45 million. And park staff did present this to the planning board. They had a discussion. And while they don't advocate for a reduction in any of their programs. They work hard to keep our park system as great as it is through the funding that they get. And so a $1.45 million cut is quite large. But looking at what they do, they like to maintain what they have, so they don't look to making cuts in the current services they provide, and then they look toward items where they're still looking to construct parks. And as you can see on page 2 of the staff report, there are 5 projects that have future funding for construction. And then on page 3, it goes through in detail where the park staff, the planning board, and council staff have landed in that, while not recommended, the project that would make the most sense to, at this point, delay its funding is Ovid Hazen Wells Recreational Park. And what that would do is it would retain design funding, but it would cut the construction funding from starting in FY21 and moving it to FY22. And then by moving the construction funding, the stream of funding for it then shifts out past the end of the CIP, which is part of that reduction. But I know that park staff has some information they want to share with you regarding this.
Let's hear 'em.
Sure, we do have a couple of slides we'd like to put up. We don't presume that you have all the background on this particular park, so we would orient you on what the project is about and then walk you through what this cut means in terms of schedule and scope.
All right.
Okay, for the record, I'm Tricia McManus with the Park Development Division, and Ovid Hazen Wells is a 290-acre park in Clarksburg. Just for orientation, this is 270, this is Ridge Road. The park is located here. It's near Little Bennett Park and Black Hill Regional Park. It was donated to the commission in 1981 with a caveat in the deed that we would relocate the historic Wells Carousel from Wheaton Regional Park to this park once there was enough development in the Clarksburg area and the park could support it. We completed a master plan in 2000 and built the initial phase of park development, which was for active recreation facilities, in 2006. And since we built that phase, we've had requests from the Clarksburg community to relocate the carousel. This is the park as it is today. It's divided into 3 areas, which are subdivided by these stream valleys. The parcel to the left is the active recreation part of the park, which is built. It's got ball fields. It's got a driveway that runs through the park with parking. There's a couple of picnic shelters and a small playground and some trails. The center area of the park was where the carousel was proposed to go, and that was initially planned to be a new arboretum along with a carousel. And then the Red Wiggler organic farm is at the east end of the parcel. But when we were considering relocating the carousel, this center area of the park didn't seem to make a lot of sense because it wasn't likely we were going to be building an arboretum in the near future. And, you know, the carousel seemed isolated in that area of the park. So we looked at the master plan again in 2014 and determined that the carousel could fit in the active recreation area of the park along with other support facilities that would make that a destination and a place that people could spend the day. Those facilities, additional facilities, would include a splash pad, an adventure teen play area, open space, terraces, dog park, much more playground area and trails. The center of the park would remain as a passive area with natural surface trails, and the east end would remain as the organic farm area. So we completed a facility plan for those additional facilities in 2015, and the total project budget was $19 million, which was not affordable. So we came up with a first phase budget, which was $8.1 million, which would include the carousel and a minimum number of facilities we thought were needed to support the project. At the bottom here, this shows our current funding. In the CIP right now, we have $5.1 million for the project. We actually had to phase that first phase into 2 sub-phases. We have our design funding now in 19 and 20, and then a $5 million project now and a $3 million project in the future. With the affordability scenario, we've had to reduce the first phase project to $3.6 million with a larger second phase. This shows what we are going to do with the $8.1 million, which really got the carousel relocated with a new building and ticketing facilities to support it, outdoor plaza, a small play area, a terraced amphitheater, and a skate park. And these are images of what the carousel might look like. This view is looking back this direction, so you see the roundhouse, the support ticketing and picnic facilities, the play area over here. These are images of what these facilities might look like, the amphitheater, the picnic area, some of the play facilities. And then this was what we envisioned a linear skate park could look like. Our reduced $5 million phase actually only gets the carousel relocated with the roundhouse, very limited play elements, the drop-off, and some limited parking. So in summary, we, reducing the size of the Phase 2 project, we don't think we can even get the minimum, carousel relocated. So we would be likely having to delay the project a little bit further or rethinking what that first phase might be. It might not include the carousel, it might be other facilities. So we would prefer to keep the project as it is.
Okay. So the affordability reconciliation, again, summarize the impact, Pam?
So in this case, the affordability reconciliation with the non-recommended, but the identified shift in funding for this park is what's before you. There were other projects, if you go back to page 2, that were listed: Josiah Henson Historic Park, Brookside Garden Master Plan implementation, and 2 projects related to Little Bennett. But as park staff walked through their explanation for their priorities, where they landed was the delay to Hazen Wells was.
Little Bennett remains on track.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
The rest remain on track. It would be this one park would be delayed. The construction funding wouldn't start in '21. It would start in '22.
Hey, it was hard to get Little Bennett into there, frankly. That's been a conversation year after year. So that we can keep that in is excellent. Okay. Okay, I have no objection to this. Before I turn to Andrew, the mini pitch, the hard surface mini soccer facilities for futsal or just pickup soccer. I know you're looking at it. I would really like to request a strategic plan for that type of facility. I concur with those who observe that youth sports all too often has become a very expensive proposition, and you have to travel to get to fields. And if you're a low-income kid in a community, a lot of multifamily housing, it's just it's beyond your reach, and access to full-scale fields is part of the soccer experience, but actually sort of a neighborhood kind of pickup, like let's go out and play, is also really desirable. And globally, a lot of countries are moving towards creating these facilities that are sort of the size of a basketball court, and they have a goal on each end, so kids can play 2-on-2, 3-on-3, something like that, and really work on their skills and maybe actually have a shot at competing and being on a star on a high school team and getting a college scholarship. It's not something that, the only kids who can afford to pay that MSI. I know MSI has scholarships, but all the same, it's a big problem with athletics. I think it's all going towards these kind of over involved, competitive leagues. And so we have a crucial role ensuring that athletics is still something that's accessible to the public, and I'm really, really intrigued by this idea of these concrete, small soccer spaces that, it's about the size of a tennis court, size of a basketball court. I'm hoping that there's the possibility of multi-use, that you could have one that is a tennis court and a futsal court. I'm not sure. We'll need to see what you find, but just. We're way behind schedule, so can you just give me a 2-sentence here, Mike? You're looking into it?
We are looking at mini pitch, and we do have some futsal courts on the way and some other projects.
All right, so can we come back,
Yeah.
in like 2 months maybe, and you guys could really give us a thorough review? I'd like to do sort of an analysis of where kids have access and where we could use these types of facilities. Just really take this up. Andrew.
I did just want to note we have cricket fields and mini pitches, so we're really bringing the international flavor to our athletics, which I love and is great. Switching gears on this, I think I don't have any objection either, so I guess that's 2 votes. But I just wanted to ask a quick question on Wall Park, because I've gotten some conflicting information based on the letter that you sent over and some of the materials for this from the planning board and some concerns there. And I don't know if REC and DGS are still here, but information from them on, since it's really a REC project from my understanding, Wall Park is critical to White Flint and to, similar, I think, to the farm women's market, to realizing the White Flint vision. And my understanding was that delay wouldn't in any way impact what happened with the Gables development and being able to fulfill that. It seemed, your letter, Mr. Anderson, seemed to indicate that that might not be the case. And so I just wanted to be very clear that if we do accept the delay on Wall Park, that won't in any way inhibit the construction of the developer building the parking lot, which is what the turning Wall Park from a parking lot into an open green space is hinged upon.
Yeah, our concern was that it was not clear to us that some of our friends on the executive branch side who are new, who are smart people, but are not necessarily conversant with everything that's come before.
Casey, you gotta get that mic right
I'm
up
sorry.
close. You can move
We were concerned that that perhaps some of the executive branch folks who were new who had not been involved in some of these discussions leading up to this point or necessarily focused on them in their previous capacities, even the ones who were working in Montgomery County government. We wanted to make sure they understood that this is not, the timing of this is not really elective on the part of the government. It has to proceed in sync with the Gables development project and their parking garage. So it's not that we wanted to push it forward or pull it back, but just to make it clear, everybody's expectation should be the money has to be available when Gables is ready to go because they're building the garage on behalf of the rec department. And I think Jenny is on top of this, but that was really the point, was just to make sure there was no misunderstanding that this is something that we could push out for affordability reasons or any other reason. It has to go when it goes.
Before turning over, I want to make very clear, it was my understanding, after talking extensively with all the stakeholders involved, that the money would be available when it was needed, and that was a commitment that wasn't going to be changed. So I just want to make sure, because I share the concern of Park and Planning, that this isn't an affordability question. It either happens or it doesn't happen at the exact moment that the development takes place, which the county doesn't control, the private developer controls, because it's, of course, private development that is making this deal work. And so I just want that public commitment, and then I'm ready to move on. Committed, or?
Well, my understanding is that the developer's plans are on hold, and so this updated schedule reflects that update.
So that's different. I just want to be clear.
Our understanding is that the plan is, on Gables' part, to start construction in early 2020, that they're working on permitting and financing through 2019. There may be some update in 60 days, but our understanding is that they're on track to start building next year.
Could OMB report back on that? Because my understanding is what Chairman Anderson's understanding is, and it was also my understanding based on information from DGS and from REC that given the fact that the development was taking place now, even with the delay, that the money would be available when it was due per the development agreement. And if that is not the case, that the assumption on the affordability decision and delay was off of the idea that they weren't moving forward, then we need to rethink this. The information that we received from the executive branch wasn't accurate, or there was some misinformation or misunderstanding, and we need to clarify that, because I don't think that it is a good situation if we aren't ready to move forward with this project as we have proposed and as the public expects and as is part of envisioning the vision of that plan.
We'll follow up with you shortly.
Thank you.
All right, so without objection, we approve the affordability reconciliation reluctantly, and we're finished with this item, right?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. On to the Veers Mill sector plan. Okay, so Pam is going to take us through a number of recommendations on property and zoning. The transportation discussion is a future discussion that is
Correct.
next week, I think?
It'll be next Monday, the 4th.
Next Monday, the
Today,
4th.
we'll try to cover everything but transportation, and I think it will depend on the time. The committee will just have to let me know if we get to a point you need to stop and we haven't finished. We can make a mark in the report there and come back to it. But with that, we'll let the planning staff get settled. As you know, the Veers Mill plan, it stretches approximately 4 miles between Wheaton Central Business District and the city of Rockville. The neighborhoods that line this corridor are predominantly characterized by single-family homes, supported by neighborhood schools, religious and civic institutions, and parks and open space. There is limited commercial development and multifamily housing, and about half of the multifamily units are along Twin Brook Parkway between Veers Mill and the Metro. Nearly 75% of the residents within the plan area are African American, Asian, or Hispanic, with Hispanic and Latino residents representing approximately 41%. The vision of the master plan is to preserve and strengthen the communities of the Veers Mill corridor by enhancing existing community resources, increasing connectivity, and promoting safety in the public realm. We're going to cover the land use and zoning recommendations today, as well as recommendations regarding parks, open space, the environment, and schools. If you will, you can look at your, either open your plan if you'd like, or open the staff report. The recommendations on land use and zoning.
Okay, before we go right into the recommendations, were you about to go into the recommendations?
Well, I was going to start by district, but yeah,
Okay, so
straight
before
ahead.
we do that, Gwen, I mentioned this to you by email. I didn't figure you'd be able to have an answer this quickly, but I wanted to just say, I've been reading this book called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and it is an incredibly powerful book. I recommend everyone read it. It describes how housing development that used federal financing often was required by the federal government to have racial covenants or restrictions. And so much new development that happened in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s was whites only. And I don't know that that was the case in Veers Mill, but I would like to know. And because a lot of the neighborhoods are post-war boom, and it looks like they were built by a single developer, so there was, very big financing issues. I don't know if you have an answer there at all, but
We did get your request over the weekend.
Yeah.
I have our historic preservation staff doing research now.
Okay.
We should be able to give you information, I hope, by the time of the next work session next week. These properties are a bit newer.
Right.
So I don't know the answer yet to your question, but we will find out.
great. I'd like to know, I think it's a huge part of the story of these communities and of our county and of the whole Washington region. So I think, generally speaking, in our history treatments, we ought to include that history. And I think it's sort of, as I reflected upon it, I thought it was missing from this. There must be some relevant story here, almost regardless. And I think it's just something we ought to always bring forward and understand that we're still grappling with the impact today of what undoubtedly was. We know that a lot of the county was restricted, and that black people, Jews, could not live in those communities for a long time, Hispanics, and what that did was it served to ensure that some schools were whites only, and the income level was higher, and of course African Americans were concentrated in poverty probably in DC. They weren't able to move into suburban communities, and it's a legacy that is still so present, and it is like profoundly present. And so again, I don't know how exactly it ties into this, but I just think it's something we have to
We
keep a
agree it
spotlight
is a
on.
very important part of history that needs to be kept in everyone's minds, and we will research this
Thanks. I mean, I know
specific
you've done that
area.
in the past. I remember the letter that you found from Colonel Brooke Lee about Littonsville, where he called specifically for creating a buffer between the white community and the colored community through
Oh, yeah, that was
zoning.
Blair Lee the second.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't
Yeah,
Colonel Brooke Lee, it was Blair Lee.
Yeah, one of the next generation. Actually, interesting that you raised that, because that was another generation closer to ours.
Interesting. So, and that was in what years was that? That was
in the late 50s,
Late
early
50s.
60s, yeah.
So as recently as the late 50s and early 60s, the county was actively perpetuating the legacy of slavery and segregation in housing through official policy, not that long ago. I was almost born at that time. Did you, yes.
Yeah, Chair Reamer, I really think this is very important. Part of, obviously, the work that we are all engaged in with this racial equity and social justice policy is so that we don't have to bring these things up, that perhaps they are part of the background that is included in everything that we do. I would add to that it would also be important to understand the most recent pattern, right? Because when you look at a master plan like this one, and as Ms. Dunn just alluded to the demographic makeup of that corridor, you also have to take into consideration what the impact is on immigrants who came to this county and how they migrated in terms of housing patterns. Many arrived in Langley Park, and then some people, worked very hard, and then they were able to perhaps go up county when it was affordable to find step-up housing. And this area here as well is one where a lot of people have found, existing affordable housing. So it's also, I think, important to understand those patterns and why people have made those decisions, because there is the legacy. And, we're engaged in this conversation right now with the request to rename Lee Middle School precisely because of this legacy. But then there's also sort of the most recent, I would say 1980s until now, we still see certain patterns, but this is more of the recently arrived, meaning since the 1980s, immigrants, and why did they choose to live, or concentrate in certain parts of the county? Because that will inform us also as we're making these decisions about upzoning or trying to find ways to get affordable housing. That's really important. And the fact that we cannot overlook the need to have these folks present and very much engaged in these master plans. It should not be an afterthought, right? Because they're the people that live there. Imagine if it was a flip side, right? We totally would ignore folks who were white that live predominantly in certain areas and not engage them in the conversation when you're making decisions that will potentially alter their livelihood or their stability. So we have to begin to think of this from that perspective more and more. And to me, this particular plan is so illustrative of what you were just describing and how we need to, I think, do better when it comes to this. Thank you.
And I would say, in a sense, this plan has been transformational for us in terms of how we are doing our outreach. And this is an effort where, again, and you borrowed the banner at the back of the auditorium, where we have made
put it up.
Yes.
I didn't even see it.
Efforts to reach out to people who live in the community in ways that are different than we have traditionally reached out. We want to, acknowledge staff's efforts on that, literally, going door to door with flyers, having lots of information on bus shelters and on buses, working with Commissioner Natalie Fanny Gonzalez to do a lot of outreach in Spanish. And, we see this as the future. This is how we hope to do outreach in all of our master plans in the future, and we can always do more. We can always learn to do it better. It's one of those things, constant improvement. But I feel like we made some good progress in beginning to move in that direction with this plan.
And I just wanted to add, we really appreciate Councilmember Navarro's assistance in helping to turn out residents to the county council hearing as well. We certainly do our best for the planning board hearings and the work sessions, for the staff going out in the field, but it was certainly obvious that you had done a lot of work very successfully to draw out more members of the community for that hearing. So I think working together, we can always try to improve the quality and breadth of our outreach.
I do appreciate that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that in 2019 in Montgomery County, it should not depend, on one particular council member or a particular member of the planning board, because we need to have that recognition of who we are. So these should not be special efforts. This really should be the way that we do our business. So I just offer that because after, sitting here and also at the Board of Education for so many years and tracking the demographic changes, it's become very clear to me that the moment has come for us to stop referring to these kinds of efforts and outreach initiatives as, nice things to do and it's so critical and important. But if we want to be real about dismantling this type of legacy, then it just has to happen. And it has to be done well. And it has to be done consistently. And we need to start seeing those results, meaning that whenever we do have public hearings or, anything that does occur, we need to see those people there. And we do know what the best practices are. To do that, I have one person in my office. That's not a lot of people. But it takes a lot of work, but eventually it starts to pay off. So I just offer that as a general mantra that I will be very vocal about, given that this is my last term, that we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back, whenever there's one off effort. This needs to be how we do our work.
So did you feel that you helped devise a new model in this process that you'll be able to apply in the future?
We I think, learned good information about what works and what doesn't work. And as I said, it's a continuing process of improving how we do our outreach. I think we learned some good things here, but we have more to learn, and we're going to continue working on it.
Thank you. Pam?
Thank you. With that, so the way that the staff report's been laid out, the same way that the master plan was, you have 4 districts that make up the corridor. And we're going to walk through the land use and zoning recommendations district by district, starting at the first one, which is up near the Wheaton CBD. It's the Newport Mill District. It begins at the eastern edge of the planned area at Galt Avenue and College Avenue and extends to Valleywood Drive and Gale Street. The Newport District is primarily characterized by single-family detached homes, although there are 2 townhouse communities in the district, the Town and Country subdivision and Montclair Manor. The maps on page 15, 16, and 17 of your master plan will show you the existing land uses and the existing and proposed zoning for the Newport Mill District. The first thing that is a recommendation in this district regarding land use and zoning involves the town and country townhouses. And I don't know if you'll recall, but when we did the zoning code rewrite a few years ago, we created new townhouse zones. And so the idea is that when we go through the master planning process, we will take the existing townhouse zones from the old code and we will reconfirm them, or we will translate them into something that is from the new code. So this just basically said they were RT for residential townhouse 10, and they will now become TMD, which is townhouse medium density.
Okay, so I'm on the map on page 14 and 15. Are you saying that everything on this page is zoned townhouse? Is that, help me refine.
No.
I know you're not. So which part is that?
Pages 76 and 77 in the plan actually focus
maps.
in.
I'm sorry, not pages. Maps 15, 16, and 17 on pages 76 through 78.
That's a difference?
Yes.
You said
Sorry about that.
76 and 77.
Yes.
All right, yeah. So.
Right. So the dark brown on page 76.
It's that section there.
Yeah, that's the townhouse development. That's
Okay.
the town and country. And we're just recommending that it get renamed to TMD.
Gotcha.
It's just, of course.
So recognize I'm a little new to this. I understand the switch and the change. It makes sense. It's something that was expected. But the previous zones, we had what, RT10 and RT 12.5 here.
Right.
And now we're changing it to TMD, which is the new
Right. Moderate
townhouse,
density
medium
townhouse
density or
zones.
moderate
Medium.
density. What's the what's the change between RT10, RT12.5, and what TMD allows?
There were units per acre, and so the TMD allows a maximum of 12.5 units per acre. The RT10 had allowed 10, and the RT12.5 allows 12.5. So
This would all go to 12.5?
It all goes to 12.5.
So some of these are 10, some of these are 12.5. They're
Exactly.
all going to go to 12.5?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I needed. Thanks.
The Town and Country subdivision goes from RT10 to TMD. And below that, on page 2 of the staff report, is the Montclair Manor townhouses. Those are currently RT 12.5, and they would also go to TMD. And there was no testimony received regarding this change. And
Okay,
staff
that
supports
sounds good.
this.
No objection?
Yep. That would move us to the next district, which is the Connecticut Randolph District. This one begins at Valley Wood Drive and extends to the eastern edge of Matthew Henson State Park. The district includes a variety of housing types, including single-family, duplex, and multifamily. In addition to these residential uses, within this district, you have the commercial centers at the intersection of Veers Mill and Randolph Road. There are several community facilities also in this area. We have the Hollywood Park Senior Center, Connecticut Blairwood Pool, which is private, and the Department of Recreation Administrative Offices, as well as Veers Mill Baptist Church. The sites within the Connecticut Randolph District that are recommended for rezoning include the Stony Mill Square Shopping Center, the Veers Mill Village Shopping Center, the northeast quadrant of Veers Mill Road and Randolph Road, and then the Department of Recreation Administrative Offices. The maps for these locations are on pages 84 through 86.
So we're now also talking about the Department of Recreation space.
That will be in this discussion. I would, if you would like, I can walk you through. There's a recommendation for Stony Mill. We can cover that first, then Veers Mill Village
Yeah.
second.
Let's do them one at a
And
time.
so forth. They're one at a time. So the first one, just turn to that page, is Stony Mill Square. It is currently zoned CRT with a total density of 0.75, commercial density of 0.75, residential density of only 0.25, and a height of 45 feet. And some of that site is zoned R60. A lot of times that represents a parking area. Parking was sometimes when zones became mixed use or
So-
commercial, they retained some of the residential zoning for parking.
Is this just on the one side of Veers Mill, or does it include the shopping center on the other side? Stony
This
Mill
is
Square?
just on one side.
Just on
This
one
is the
side.
one that is in the,
And the economic conditions of this center right now, it's quite successful, right? There's no vacancies, there's thriving businesses,
Yes, right now, I believe that they don't have any vacancy. It's a very, very active center. I don't believe, and I'm going to ask Carrie or Jessica to correct me, I don't believe in conversations with the property owner that they've expressed an interest in redevelopment at this time. But again, these plans have a 20-year life, so we're looking at the future as well.
absolutely. It's just an observation, because a lot of times you see these older commercial centers that are, packed with people, and there's tons of businesses in them, and a lot of people look at those centers and say that needs to be revitalized. Usually the
Right.
point of revitalization is to bring business and people into the center, but the people are already there and the businesses are already there. And, it's the property owner may not have much incentive to take on a whole lot of debt and a whole lot of risk when they're already they have a profitable ownership arrangement. So, the aesthetics may not be what you get from new construction,
Right.
but it's working pretty well for the people who are using it. The problems I think you see are typically transportation impacts, walkability, safety, lighting,
Right.
other things that we need to really address. But the core mission of, do we need to revitalize this? No, actually, it doesn't need to be revitalized. It just needs to be improved and assisted, but it's successful already.
right, and I think that, what possibly the planning staff heard is that the property owner doesn't envision really huge redevelopment to this property in the near term. They have a ground lease that extends for decades on the one portion of the property where the thrift store is currently located. On the other part of the property, there will be some redevelopment and some minor changes. The gas station, some of
Scott,
that part.
unless there's something you really, really have to say, you're here to represent your client, I'm assuming, but if I said something incorrect that you need to clarify for the record, or? So far you're going okay. Okay, you're welcome to sit down, but I'm not going to give you the mic unless there's something you really need to say, because we're way behind on time.
Okay, so I think that's correct. The expectation is that there won't be a whole rescale redevelopment of the site anytime soon. And what this zoning change allows is for residential development, should that
Right.
change ever
Should that
occur.
change? It may be, maybe 10, 15, 20 years.
It adds residential
Times
density.
have changed, things are different. You never know. So we're making it possible.
Right, and there are some design guidelines in the plan. There are things that that the planners would love to see if the developer, the owner of the property wants to undertake some short-term fixes to make that a more inviting community center
Right.
place to go. But they're not a requirement. The main requirements come with redevelopment.
Thank you.
The next property.
One of these days, I'm going to buy that tiger stripe rug that hangs out in front of the shopping center. Yeah, probably.
Is the Veers Mill Village. This is the one with the Dunkin' Donuts on the corner. And also, it's pretty much the same zoning recommended for here, and it's to really allow a little bit of residential development should this site ever redevelop. And then again, there are some design guidelines in there to help make it a better site to visit should things occur on that property.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you were just describing, that it is important to recognize that the reason why these shopping centers are doing so very well is because of the fact that they have responded to the needs of the demographics of that whole entire area. And so we do see that. I think there may be some places where I would take exception, which would be like the Glenman Shopping Center, which even though, it does well, but it does need some. I think it does need some
for
TLC.
different reasons.
For different reasons, absolutely. But I think in this particular case, just as we are talking about, who lives there, et cetera, I think there has been a definite fit and match in really serving the community, and the community really does appreciate that.
Right. Absolutely. No, I agree. I think Glenmont is an imperative for, a lot of reasons. This is different.
Right, so that's the same zoning recommendation and change, and staff concurs with the planning board that seems appropriate for these sites. The next one is the northeast quadrant of Veers Mill Road and Randolph Road, and this is the area where the McDonald's is currently located, where you do have behind those commercial businesses, you have the Department of Rec Center administrative offices, but we're going to cover that separately. So right now, just if you look at the northeast quadrant, it's made up of 5 properties. These properties include a bank, a laundromat, a restaurant, and some surface parking. The properties are currently zoned CRT with modest amounts of commercial development and only a 0.25 of residential. One of the property owners has stated an interest in pursuing some townhouse development in this area on a 1.9 acre site that is currently split zoned. It's between CRT and CRN. And so the plan recommends rezoning these 5 properties all to the CRT zone. That could allow for some consolidation of properties in the future, and it allows the property owner who is interested in some townhouse redevelopment to pursue that as well.
Okay. Now, we've got a recommendation from MHP about.
That's the next one. So
Okay,
now
sorry,
if we move
we're still on the
forward,
quad. Okay.
do we have any questions about the northeast quadrant, or does the planning staff have anything they think they need to add? No. Okay. So the next one this is the one where we have received testimony. That's the Department of Recreation Administrative Offices. It is currently zoned R60, so that's a residential zone for single-family detached homes. It's approximately 6 acres in size. It contains the administrative offices, a surface parking lot, and a small playground. The plan recommends rezoning the site from R60 to CRN with a 1 FAR, 0 commercial. The one total FAR is represented as residential with a height of 65 feet. And this would be to allow for the construction of medium-density residential development near the existing commercial center. The testimony we received was from the Montgomery Housing Partnership, suggesting that perhaps a higher density could be useful in this area, or at least a recognition of more housing in the area to address needs with affordable housing. There was also testimony from residents at I think at least one, if not 2, at our public hearing, that we're concerned with the density on this site, that it would go from R60 in an area where there's a playground and some open space to high-density residential. So the current recommendation for CRN at a density of 1 FAR on a 6-acre site, it would allow for approximately 110 townhouses or 200 multifamily units. Across the street, if you look at the block that contains just single-family residential homes that are across Bushy Drive, there are, I think, 34, 35 homes in that big block. So just to give you context of, you'd be moving from the Department of Rec site of 6 acres to whatever happens on it, between anywhere from 110 townhouses to 200 multifamily units to 36 single-family detached across the streets.
Okay. All right, well, Andrew has some comments. I want to make sure we're doing enough here. We've heard from MHP about what the zoning could be here. We got a letter from them yesterday. Did you see that? What's the difference between what they've recommended and what's in the plan?
So I don't recall, I don't believe they recommended a zoning. So what their language recommended was just a concern for the ability to put enough multifamily residential on the site. And I think it was more the language that said that that site should transition to the single-family neighborhood in a scale that is representative of the single-family neighborhood. So I think their concern was more that if you wanted to put multifamily on the entire site, you may have a master plan conformance issue as you approach the single-family neighborhood across the street. The language is on page 87 of your plan. It reads, redevelopment on this cluster should deliver a mix of uses near the corners of Veers Mill and Randolph and transition to residential uses compatible with the single-family residential scale toward the south and east.
Andrew?
Thank you. I think how I read the comments from our affordable housing community, or at least one particular affordable housing provider, was twofold. One was the interest in density there to meet the needs of the affordable housing challenges and get closer to a net zero or a net gain in affordable housing units in an area that has no MPDUs currently because it predated the MPDU law. Number two, my understanding, and maybe I missed this, but as part of the plan, the connection, the street connection to allow the property to work, and I thought it was this site, Gannon Road, which connects it, their interest was making that the obligation of the county as opposed to the obligation of a private developer, and it was their view that by doing that, it would allow for a nonprofit developer to build there. In the absence of that, a nonprofit developer couldn't make the numbers work. I mean, that was...
Good point. Yes, I'd forgotten about
so
that.
I was interested to hear if you could comment a little bit on that, of what your thoughts were, and just to give your perspective balancing this question of naturally occurring missing middle housing versus affordable, an affordable multi-family housing that has a, greater density, higher number of needs.
So I'm going to...
Meets the higher needs, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to be asking Carrie and Jessica and Lisa to address some of your comments. The thing that I would say in general about this site is we were getting lots of different testimony, both the idea that people wanted to see more density here and neighbors in the adjacent single-family neighborhood having concern about that. We are recommending what we think is a very good compromise, in a sense. In the R60 zoning that's there today, you could produce maybe 40 houses and on this property. And we are recommending a zone that would allow, as was mentioned, up to 100 or so townhouses or 200 multifamily, or it could be some combination thereof. It doesn't say that it has to be all townhouses or all multifamily. What's really nice about the CRN zone, and the reason we mention missing middle, is that it allows for you to do a variety of housing types on the same property. So we were envisioning an opportunity where you might have townhouses or smaller detached houses closer to the single family, transitioning up to multifamily along Randolph Road, which is the busy road. we haven't drawn a design of what it needs to be, but we are very respectful of the idea that in any situation where you're backing up to single-family houses in any neighborhood, there is a compatibility issue, and there is a need to provide, especially on a site this large, it's actually 5 acres. It's quite a large site, 5 or 6 acres. There's a need to provide compatibility. But I'm going to let Jessica and Carrie talk about.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Jessica McVeary. With regard to Gannon Road Extended, you specifically inquired about that. With a site that's 6 acres in size, we really felt like it was important to introduce some additional street connectivity for permeability in the site. And we tried to make the recommendation for the extension of Gannon Road to be really flexible, so that we didn't sort of identify a specific alignment. We sort of said, you should extend Gannon Road and provide some kind of connection between Coley Drive and Randolph Road. We may discuss this in greater detail next week in the transportation recommendations work session. But you'll note from MCDOT that they have requested a little bit more specificity with regard to where that intersection would actually land. But we really felt as though that street connection was important to break up the block, to provide access, to provide additional permeability through the site.
Yeah, and I think perhaps we'll talk more about it next week, but the reason why I brought it up was that was specifically one of the main points that was raised by the affordable housing community, not disagreeing with the need for the road, but explaining that they didn't think that it was viable for an affordable housing provider, a nonprofit affordable housing provider, given their business model, to be able to pay for the road and build an affordable housing project. And so it was a market reality issue that directly relates to housing, which is why I brought it up. And I just was wondering whether, maybe we could talk about it next week in more detail, because it is a transportation issue that relates to housing. But, whether,
it's a housing issue today.
It absolutely is. But whether that was considered and what the thoughts are, and whether that should be on our radar, of whether it should be, a county obligation. Please.
I'm a little skeptical on this one. It seems like a nice to have, but how much? $20 million road. Getting piggybacked into this.
Well, I really doubt this is a $20 million road.
I mean, has any road ever been cheap and easy? You got stormwater. As soon as the second you touch stormwater requirements.
I would just say that we consider these kind of basic road connections to be non-elective. We would expect that of any property owner who's developing their property. Obviously, we don't want to burden any property owner unnecessarily, particularly an affordable housing provider. But we do consider breaking up these blocks to be a pretty, that's sort of one of the original sin problems of the way that the suburbs were developed, is a lot of cul-de-sacs that don't connect to anything, a lot of big blocks that.
But where does this take you from where to where? The value of this.
It improves the value of the site, actually, because.
Well, they're going to need to have access to the site, no question.
Not just because you need a driveway or you need a way to get into the whatever park is available, but because the more street-facing buildings you have, the more value you can drive from the site. We'd be happy to talk to you about this in more detail. We think it's pretty important to establish the principle that we need, as we have these very incremental opportunities. Not like we can start over from scratch again, but to be able to fill in some of
I agree with that. I think the
street
point is, though, is there enough development potential to leverage this connection? I think that's the real question. It's one thing when you're doing it in a place where it's clear that the cost can be absorbed. Is this one of those cases? Carrie, did you?
If I may, Carrie Sanders. So I think this is an important question. I'm glad you brought it up. We do face this a lot through the development review process, where new roadways are considered through that process. So we want to make sure it's in the master plan, so that when it comes through the development process, it's in there as a guidance. We always emphasize that where the road is specifically placed is something that we consider in development review, not necessarily in the master plan, because we want to be able to be flexible enough that a variety of developments that may come through can be considered. So I do think, as Mr. Anderson pointed out, having this connection is what a lot of applicants would seek to make sure that people can access their homes, make sure that we're not creating more traffic on the roadways in front of the development, that we're having some internal network that sort of diffuses some of that traffic. So I think it's important to have it in the plan, but in terms of the specificity, that's something that we can certainly continue to discuss with you and refine as we move forward.
And I was just going to make the point, this is county-owned land. We are going to go through, we assume, a disposition process and look for possibly, if no other county agency wants to use this property, because that's the first option, look for a private partner that may want to work with the county on this property. And once that happens, there's lots of room for negotiation in terms of which partner does what, which of the partners in the public-private partnership does what. So there, at this point, it's a desire line shown through the plan. It's not clear it has to be a public road, it could be a private road, it could be built by the county, it could be built by the private partner. I think there's just a lot of options out there, but for the master plan, it's mainly showing a desire line.
And I would note this is in the heart of the transportation section, so we'll make sure Dr. Orland knows that you'd like to come back to it next week when you do the transportation issues.
Thank you. And I think it's just a broader question of making sure that we're getting the highest and best use out of this. And I guess the follow-up to that is we just had an extensive conversation about ball fields and the lack of access for certain communities. And I was just curious, this is a public property. As part of this plan, was there any look at recreational access as part of this plan area and whether these communities have adequate access to recreational opportunities? I know trails was part of it, very extensive.
Access to public facilities is at the end of the plan.
Right. Okay, I can wait for that then. I was saying because we have property here that we're zoning it for a particular purpose in order to meet a particular need, but there could be an opportunity to leverage that property to solve a different need. Housing is one, of course, and is a significant one, but access to recreational and other public
Yes, you're exactly right. I think this plan, again, is just trying to open up options so that as the county goes through the decision-making process of what may happen on this piece of land, again, it may be that another county agency feels that they need to use it. It may be that there's a desire to put some recreational facilities on the site. It may be housing ends up being the best choice. What this plan is just trying to do is keep all of those options open.
Sure, and just and we think that based on this is the highest and best use of the site. It leaves options as you said.
I think that one thing that was important for us as we were considering the recommendations for this plan is its proximity to the neighborhood serving retail that's there today, as well as the future bus rapid transit along Beers Mill Road and Randolph Road. Thinking about how we could accommodate additional housing opportunity near transit, existing transit as well as future transit, in a place that would promote walkability, and think about how you could be walkable from your from the redevelopment of this site to the neighborhood serving retail, which gets at sort of the heart of the issue related to connectivity and safety and promoting walkability, encouraging walkability. I think also you mentioned, did we evaluate sort of accessibility to recreational uses? And one of the things that you might recall that we mentioned a lot on the tour was this neighborhood the series of neighborhoods is really well served by parks and open space, as well as schools, and the availability of the fields at the fields at those schools. The problem or the challenge is that those facilities are often sort of tucked into the neighborhood, and it's not necessarily an easy walk to get to them. So that sort of gets back at how we're trying to encourage that those facilities are better. They're better accessible.
So by like the Vision Zero aspect of this plan, making those school facilities, existing public facilities, would be more accessible to more of the communities because they'd be safer to walk to or bike to or to get to by more residents. That makes sense. This is, I don't know if it's a comment or question, it's my last one, I promise, Mr. Chairman, but it's interesting to me that this is zoned as residential, but we have a government office there, and I was just curious if that, did the office predate the zoning, or does the government not care about the zoning?
It's not unusual for institutional uses, whether they're private or public, to be on single-family zone property. Sometimes that's done intentionally in master plan to assure the community that if the government use moves on, that there will be single-family zoning there, that'll be very minimal intensity. In other cases, it's the fact that the single-family zone property was probably less expensive to acquire because it didn't have a lot of zoning potential, and the government or an institutional user can put whatever they want on that site. They're not constrained by the single-family.
Since
limitation.
government uses can locate in any zone without regard, typically it's whatever the adjacent zone is. So if it's surrounded by R60, it's typically R60. Now, as we go back through master plans, we're not just looking at what the current use is, but what a potential future use could be. And so we're changing the zoning to make sure we're prepared for any future opportunity.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
All right, so we will take a little more of a look at this and come back to this when we come back.
That's fine. I don't know, we did receive 2 other comments from Montgomery Housing Partnership. I don't know if you want to cover them here. They do pretty much deal with this district, and one had to do with the Holiday Park site to allow multifamily on that parking lot that's behind that building where we had held the public hearing. Currently, it's covered in solar panels. Their point being you could, put those on the roof. The entire site is about 5.5 acres. The parking lot is about 1.5 acres to maybe 2 acres. It's really not that large. And so while it wasn't a recommendation from the planning board to change the zoning of this site, which is probably R60, if the committee or council wants to consider that, then you would move to, say, a CRN zoning, maybe something similar to what's been recommended for the Department of Rec site. And all I'll say to that is, it might require that the whole site redevelop. The idea that you could put multifamily back on that parking lot, it doesn't really have great access, and I'm not sure that the access in and of itself plus parking plus fire rescue, all of that would be a challenge. But could
You'd
we
have to
open that
drive
opportunity?
through the front of the rec center and around the back to get
Right.
to it and so on.
Right. That was a recommendation, and
Yeah.
it wasn't
No, I
something
think we
that
ought
had
to,
been previously
I think we ought to
considered.
try to open up more possibilities, even if we don't know that they're as realistic. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I have some skepticism of the viability of that particular parcel to a redevelopment, but I think the redevelopment opportunity of the full parcel longer term, I think having the flexibility to address the affordable housing needs are significant. So I think we should look at that. Is there any issue from the planning board of why we wouldn't rezone the Holiday Park site to CRN or something similar to be able to address that in a redevelopment, the opportunity to add additional density? I mean, it's pretty good site, pretty decent sized site with the Holiday Park facility.
I think that the one sort of thought that I would ask you to consider is that facility is extremely well loved.
It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and so so any redevelopment, I would think we would want to include some language with that zoning recommendation that would suggest that facility be replaced.
Oh, yeah, and I see it as a potential opportunity for a dual use. I mean, at some point, that facility will have outlived its useful life as a building, and it's going to have to be redeveloped. And I think if we have the zoning, we could potentially have a dual use site, but we have Mr.
Would it be
Asano.
possible to, rather than rezoning it at this time, to put some language in the plan that would say if a possibility came up for a co-location opportunity with some housing, it would be appropriate to consider rezoning this parcel to CRN. The reason being is it is sort of a landlocked parcel. It is in the middle of a block, and I have no doubt that the people in the surrounding community would want to talk about the redevelopment of the site, maybe through a development plan amendment, through a rezoning. So that might be an opportunity to do it, especially if there's an opportunity for co-location.
Yeah, that's sounds smart. I think realistically, this thing isn't going to change. Nancy?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges in that area is just the lack of public facilities for the community. You're absolutely right that the life of that particular building, in my opinion, has reached its point. But my concern is that we don't have a lot of public facilities, and it's heavily used. So I would be really concerned. And also, just as Ms. Wright, you were saying, the characteristics of that particular location being so, right in the middle of this neighborhood, I would tend to really want that, if we're going to take anything into account, would be to enhance the kind of services, whether, parks, or I know they have some community gardens, and a much better facility that might have, senior services and maybe early childhood center or something like that. To me, that is something that is lacking in that area. I'm not sure that I would be so inclined to want to add housing there, because it's just so landlocked. So I don't know how that would play in terms of this decision, but I think maximizing co-location vis-a-vis services for the community, to me, it's something that is really lacking in that area. I mean, just having represented that area for a while now, it's very hard to find.
When you look at the rec centers that we build now, they're quite a bit bigger than this one is. And if we were going to rebuild one, we would probably use the whole site for, the rec center, and whether additional housing on top of that would pay off meaningfully to make it worth it all, seems kind of on the margin, as opposed to just time for the rec center to be refreshed and we're just going to tear it down and build a new one.
I think, again, perhaps the idea is not to rezone it at this time, but to put some language that would leave the door open. We don't know what the situation will be 15 years from now.
Can't hurt to have something in there, right?
That
But
could be
you don't want to set off
appropriate
alarm bells.
for CRN if there was a really excellent co-location project.
Yeah, I was just saying, I agree with everything that's been said. I think in every part of the county, our land is limited. We have made public policy decisions, I think appropriate ones, that has rightfully limited our available land. And so we are going to have to think about co-locating to reach different needs, affordable housing needs, community resource and access needs. I think there could be, potential senior affordable housing on site with child care and a facility. I just think we need to keep our options open. I think your point of putting it in there and having the community have a meaningful opportunity specifically on this to weigh in makes a lot of sense, to not make that as part of this process in terms of a formal zone change. But I do think that we should be thinking in every part of the county about co-locating and better maximizing our limited land resources, because we're not getting any more of them. And the county isn't growing in land mass, but it is growing in needs. It is growing in people.
All right, so some language as Gwen had suggested, I think.
Okay, come back with that. And the last comment that they made, and hopefully we won't take too long with this, we can keep moving forward, had to do with the church properties. They had a sort of a broad recommendation to consider church properties for co-locating of affordable housing. I don't believe, again, at this time, it probably makes sense to recommend any zoning change, and these weren't conversations that were had with those property owners or the community. So while interesting and something possibly for a future maybe work program initiative to look at things like this,
Okay, well, I would like, I don't know if we can talk to the property owners, if planning could, on that, particularly the church on Veers Mill.
We actually
both of
did
them.
meet with the churches,
Yeah.
both St. Catherine Labouré and the Veers Mill Baptist Church. we reached out repeatedly to the Shrine of St. Jude and ended up speaking with the Archdiocese of Washington. All three of the churches indicated that they had no interest in any redevelopment in the near term, in the midterm, in the long term. They were very, heavily used churches, and were using the space that they had, and felt in some cases that they needed more space. So for that reason, we felt that maintaining the existing zoning on those properties was appropriate.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on now then to the Robindale District, which starts at Matthew Henson State Park and goes to where Rock Creek crosses Veers Mill. This district is characterized by some civic and institutional uses, a multifamily high-rise complex surrounded by gardens, and multifamily housing. One of the recommendations of this district is to rezone 2 residential properties along Veers Mill Road across from Rock Creek Terrace. And there's a accompanying recommendation to rezone some abutting properties to a floating zone that could redevelop in the future. The rationale is that, one, you heard from the property owners that these large lots with very old homes are no longer desirable as they abut Veers Mill Road. And so the owners of both of those 2 properties have come in support of the rezoning. The recommendation for the floating zone of the abutting properties, what it does is it gets the 3 houses that sit beside those other 2 properties that are basically border Veers Mill Road, and then 2 other properties. One is a house and one is an outlot. It seems perfectly fine. The floating zone doesn't contractually make those properties have to rezone ever. But if those families got together, they resold the properties together, they desired a floating zone in the future, it would make the process more streamlined for them, but they would still have to go through rezoning. It would still be a public process, and it would still come to council to change that zone.
Why not just change the zoning? Why not?
So the properties that are recommended for the floating zone is because those property owners at this time aren't ready for the new zone, and their property tax rates would go up if they were given a zone of higher intensity. And so it does make sense to simply say that for those properties not ready for that redevelopment, that they could be ready for it in the future. The floating zone is perfectly fine in that location.
And the floating zone, again, enables them to apply for?
To apply for that rezoning,
To-
it gets a recommendation from the planning board and then goes to the hearing examiner, also for recommendation for council approval. But when you're recommended in a master plan for a floating zone, the hurdle you have to, overcome is quite low, because you've already been
Thank you.
considered.
What I guess I'm really asking, so the type of structure that they would put up theoretically with
Towns in those locations, townhouses. They could do duplexes, they could do, 2-over-2s. It's whatever they could fit. There aren't huge properties, so it would just be a transition from those high rises across Veers Mill down to the single-family neighborhood.
Okay. This seems fine to me. I think that I was hoping in this plan that we were going to look more at the edge of Veers Mill. A lot of those homes were built well before Veers Mill was the kind of road that it is today, and producing the kind of pollution that it produces and the kind of noise that it produces. And, the houses are still the same houses back from when it was, a one lane of traffic in each direction. And, I've knocked on doors on Veers Mill and on those kinds of roads all over the county. And I always find it to be concerning, I'll never shake the sight of soot on the windowsill by the front door that you can see on these homes because of just the volume of pollution that's coming off of the cars. And I got a very powerful email, which I asked you to put in the packet, but I didn't see in the packet, from a resident on, it was Georgia Avenue, but it was not, similar, about the noise and how she just is not able to sleep, and her children are not able to sleep because of the crashing, smashing sound of cars and trucks, at all hours. And I just wonder if there wouldn't be like a very modest way to allow for a housing type, a duplex, a town that has a thicker wall facing Veers Mill that is maybe oriented to the back of the property instead of to the front, where, you'd have a back alley access, and And obviously, no one's going to build $1 million townhouses. I think this is still intended to be housing for the community that is living there today, but it's housing that is safe and healthy and, nevertheless affordable. It's just, to me, it's a problem in this county where you have these major state highways, these major roads where the road has just gradually encroached all the way up to the front door of the house, and the house is still the same, and it's just not how you do it. But this was not. Gwen told me during the tour that you felt this was outside the scope of your master planning process, that you had very specific language in the general plan that you were following that would not really permit consideration of that type of change.
I think that the staff and the planning board really tried to avoid a lot of dramatic land use changes up and down this corridor, recognizing that both the single-family and multifamily housing is relatively affordable in most cases, and also that the predicate for a transformational change in the treatment of these corridors really is a general plan update, or something where we can, as a community, not just in one neighborhood but across the county, start to think about what is an appropriate way to make the transition. I think you make a great point. Colesville Road inside the Beltway, Georgia Avenue, a lot of Old Georgetown Road even. And one of the ways we've addressed that is allowing a lot of special exception dentist offices and
Casey, again, you gotta move
Sorry.
that mic up.
Doctors' offices and dentist offices
Right.
and these sort of commercial uses in what used to be single-family structures. I have to say, I don't think that's a particularly desirable or attractive land use pattern, especially when you wind up having what used to be half of the front yard is now taken over by the state highway, and the other half is now paved to provide 4 or 5 parking spaces for the dentist's patients. So, point well taken, absolutely, but we just felt that this plan is not the place to do a wholesale revision to the approach to these kind of corridors. But there are ways to do that, I think.
I think we got to look at that. I don't know that we'll have it together in this specific plan, but I think we should come back. I guess I wanted to say that because I think that we ought to consider changes that could be applied here all the same in the future. But you have to be careful. We're not. This isn't. Again, we're trying to serve the same community that is served today. This isn't a vision of how to again, it's a vision of creating housing that is safer and healthier and higher quality, as opposed to transformational change. That's not the idea.
We hope that these couple of properties that we've identified are a chance to
these
show.
These two are, I know, but they're such large properties. I mean, I'm really thinking of you got 2 houses with a mid-sized lot, and they could easily combine. Maybe they could create 3 small towns, but it's not like a huge change in terms of density. It's just it's a new sealed, soundproofed house. That's really my personal interest.
And I do think, as I had mentioned on the tour, this is going to be a theme in the general plan. We have corridors like this all over the county.
Yeah.
We have issues of connectivity. I bring up the missing middle idea of being able to create some housing types on those corridors that actually help support the single-family houses that are farther away from those major roads by creating a transition.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, but it does need to be looked at holistically.
Yeah. And I think we need to study the health issue. I mean, maybe I'm overly concerned. Maybe that's not all that different. But I'd like to know if housing that's at the edge of these major state highways, if there are concerns that we should be more attuned to. Andrew?
Thanks. I'm glad you brought this up on the bus tour. I'm glad you brought it up again today. I do think this should be a major topic of discussion for the general plan update, because I think that it is a big issue countywide, and it's a very difficult issue to deal with. I think to Mr. Anderson's point about the fact that these are particularly on Old Georgetown Road and right where I live and in my district, in District 1, those are primarily almost exclusively rentals and now commercial uses, dentist office and therapists and other things. That's not a good and appropriate land use. I have concerns about the ingress and egress, particularly on Veers Mill, and as we now do Vision Zero as a primary aspect of this, having driveway after driveway after driveway on these relatively small properties on a major thoroughfare is just not a great way to funnel pedestrian traffic and car traffic in a safe shared street way. And so I do think that we, really ought to be thinking comprehensively about this along all major corridors, reflecting the fact that the county has changed dramatically. And that's the purpose, I think, of the general plan update. And I think it's a really important point that Chairman Reamer brought up. And I hope that this will be a significant point of discussion as the general plan update takes place. I went and looked, and we had a conversation on the bus, and I followed up, but the property value of these properties along Veers Mill, but along all the major corridors in these single-family neighborhoods are 40 to 50% below what the market rate is mid-block in these communities. And so there's a reason for that. I mean, the market is showing us that the environmental and the safety and the other issues with some of these properties is not what most families are looking for. And, obviously we don't want to displace the opportunity for affordable housing, but there's a reason why these are affordable, and it's not because they're in desirable areas. It's because they're not because the community isn't desirable, it is, but because being on a major highway is not where most families want their
Well, I think,
their
if you don't mind,
kids. Yeah.
I think the idea is not that necessarily that there wouldn't be housing there. It's just that you would orient it to the back of the lot.
No, exactly.
You, know,
Yeah,
you could have like an alley in the back
Right.
and
taking
life.
taking a $300,000 house that's 40 or 50% below the mid block and turning that into a few townhouses that are actually probably below slightly what the single family home there would be a net benefit, I think, for many people. Allow a family that wouldn't otherwise be able to access that neighborhood to access it, would also be a much more desirable housing option, even if it is newer, even if it is, because you'd be subdividing the lot, or at least putting more housing on the lot. So I think it's an important, broader topic, perhaps not for this plan, but for
I
the
don't think
general
we're-
plan update.
Right. We're not really prepped. Nancy.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the crux of a lot of the conversation and policy conversations that we have to have, because this is not unique to this corridor, and it does beg the question of how aware are we of the way that people make do in order to live in this county, right? So because we throw a lot of statistics and a lot of analysis and a lot of calculations, but the bottom line is that when you look at the demographics of the school system, and you look at the kind of residential, production that we have, we know that those families are not buying those condos that have been, recently built. They can't afford it, but they're living somewhere. And it's in neighborhoods like these where they have been able to make do. And create very vibrant communities, such as the conversation we just had about that shopping center, right? It's a very vibrant shopping center that is doing very well economically because these families are the ones that go there to shop. So you have this intersection and this dynamic and this interaction that a lot of times, I will agree, we don't necessarily talk about it in a way that is realistic, and we need to start doing that. Because as we talk about expanding our tax base and as we talk about addressing all these gaps, et cetera, these are the kinds of bottom line conversations that we need to have. And that's why we need to engage all these folks, because people have been able to purchase those homes. They're homeowners. They've been able to make a life. They've been able to, as I said, create a whole economy around that area that's been very vibrant. And then if we start making some major changes, what will that do to that community? I'm not saying it's impossible, and I would agree that, there are certain conditions that are very tough, but this is happening everywhere. It's happening in, Gaithersburg, Germantown, it's happening in Wheaton, it's happening in Aspen Hill, it's happening in Veersmill. And for us as policymakers, really, we do have to be able to dig down into that conversation. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Thank you. Okay, so we're in agreement about the recommendation here?
Okay, so we'll move off of the single-family homes in the Robindale district and move on to the Rock Creek Terrace apartments. They're currently zoned RH. This was, again, one of the zones during the rewrite that was not retained. We have R10, residential multifamily zone that is equivalent. And so the recommendation is really just to change the zoning from an RH to an R10. It's more of a cleanup.
All right.
If we move on, the MNC PPC Parkland, which is abutting this property, is currently zoned RH as well. A lot of
This
times.
is the, this is a combination of like some mid-rise and then a very tall building, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
right. The parkland is currently zoned RH as well. The recommendation is to change it to R200, and other parts of Rock Creek Parkland that are abutting the piece that is still zoned RH are zoned R200. It was the lower density residential that was there when the parkland was acquired. So again, this is really just a cleanup and not controversial.
All right. Sounds good.
So we will move on to the Twin Brook District.
Let's see if we can get through Halpine and then we'll call it for the
Okay,
day.
all right. So we will work through this. The Twin Brook District, as you're aware, starts at Rock Creek Crossing, goes down Veers Mill where it intersects with Twin Brook Parkway and up toward the Metro. It's primarily characterized by the Rock Creek Stream Valley Park and multiple garden-style apartments. There are 4 primary apartment complexes in this area.
Pam, I'm sorry. I think we're
sorry.
not going to do Halpine
Okay.
today because we're running out of steam and
Okay.
we've got to be at State Ledge at 12:30.
Yes.
So
we can stop here at Twin Brook District, and
yeah.
is that what you
Is it-
prefer?
Yeah. Is there anything in Twin Brook? So Twin Brook has the Rock Creek Woods and
Rock
Halpine.
Creek Woods, right. Halpine View, Halpine Hamlet, Parkway Woods.
Yeah. Why don't we come back to that? I think
Okay.
because once we start it, we're going to need some time to talk it through.
Okay. Fine.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right. To be continued.